So let's begin, first of all, by addressing your motivation. So think that for the sake of all sentient beings who are as vast as the vastness of space, I aspire to reach the state of perfect and complete Buddhahood. And it is for this reason that I come here to listen and practice the essence of refined gold, a text that summarizes the meaning of the great Prajnaparamita texts. So in order for our practice to become pure practice of Dharma, it is very important that we rely upon a fully qualified spiritual guide. And it is through such activities, through that reliance, that we have obtained this type of precious human rebirth. It is greatly important, and it is very precious to have that. Having obtained this type of rebirth, we say, or having relied upon the teacher, we need to say that there are great benefits. What are the benefits of relying on the teacher? The fact that we make this very life, the life of precious human rebirth, meaningful. We do not waste it. And if we make this life meaningful, there is every chance that our future lives also will be meaningful, because future lives depend on this life. If this life is meaningful, then the next one can also become meaningful. Therefore, when your teacher says to you, do not waste your precious human rebirth, it is very important to act accordingly and understand that our general contact in society is always to bring about the benefit of others directly, and by doing this indirectly on the side, our own benefit as well is established. So we say that it is important to make this life meaningful, but the life does not become meaningful automatically or easily. For the life to become meaningful, we must practice according to the instructions of the Guru. We must practice according to the teachings of the Buddha. And this is actually described by the expression that says, extract the essence of the life. So in order to extract the essence of this life and make it meaningful, we need to contemplate on 3 subjects. The first one is the fact that the precious human rebirth is characterized by the 8 freedoms and the 10 endowments. The second one is to consider that this type of rebirth has great potential. And the third one is that it is very difficult to find it again. So when we say we need to contemplate on these 3 subjects, contemplate here means we need to meditate on these things. Our life does not become meaningful because we lack the motivation, the inspiration to do something with this life unless we contemplate these 3. So we will discuss these 3. So let's read quickly from our text. We're at the bottom of page 8 of the Essence of Refined Gold. So it says, practice means taking upon yourself the responsibility of continually living in accordance with the Holy Dharma, the teachings given to you by your spiritual guide. So it says here that we need to put into practice the teachings and the instructions that we receive from that teacher. So we rely on the teacher. Through working with the teacher and with the laws of cause and effect, you can take advantage of your extremely valuable human life, a life form hard to find, and once found, very meaningful, a treasure more precious than a wish-fulfilling jewel. Other than this, there is no offering of practice. Okay, so we talk about having obtained a precious human rebirth, and it says here, having this precious human rebirth is more valuable than the wish-fulfilling jewel. Now, the wish-fulfilling jewel is something that these days we do not have access to, and this is because due to the decline of our merit. However, in the past, when people had much more elevated amounts of merit, such wish-fulfilling jewels were available. And once you had such a jewel, all your wishes could effortlessly be provided for. Okay. However, it says here that having obtained this precious human rebirth is more valuable. Why? Because on the basis of our practice, we can make this life meaningful. We can make the future lives meaningful. We can generate bodhicitta. We can obtain the state of liberation. We can reach the state of enlightenment. We can make sure that we have a life that is full of happiness, that we have many friends and many people to help us, and so forth. All of those things are achievable through the precious human rebirth. So this particular type of rebirth that we have, the precious human rebirth, it has the full capacity. We can achieve many things with this. And when we say this, we indicate that once we obtain this precious human rebirth, it's important that we do not waste it, but we put it into practice. This type of rebirth is extremely rare. It's very difficult to find. Of course, there are millions upon millions of humans in this earth. However, it doesn't mean that they all have the precious human rebirth. The precious human rebirth is characterized by the 8 freedoms and 10 endowments. So merely having a rebirth doesn't mean that you have the precious human rebirth with all the possibilities and all the powerful potential that it gives you. But even before you're even born as a human, the chances of being born as a human are very slim. So obtaining a human rebirth to begin with is difficult. You need to establish the causes, which is practicing pure morality. So by practicing morality, you can obtain the human rebirth, but it doesn't mean it's the precious human rebirth. But once we obtain the precious human rebirth, we can practice many things. And this is very important for our practice of the Lam Rim. So the text says, however, it is of borderline value to listen to or practice Dharma with a motivation mixed with white, black, or gray aspects of the 8 worldly concerns, i.e. the motivation to outdo enemies and protect friends, which is praised by worldly people, but actually is shallow. The motivation to obtain material benefit, a universally condemned motivation, and the motivation of impressing others, which some think good and some despise. If you do not meditate upon impermanence, death, and so forth, and then it continues. So it is very important to understand what we have obtained and how valuable it is. The precious human rebirth has the full list of 8 freedoms and 10 endowments. When we talk about the 8 freedoms, we talk about freedom from 4 depressing states that are found in human existence, and freedom from depressing states that are found in non-human existence. So to give you an example of the second, if you were to be reborn in the lower migrations, it will be you would not have the freedom to practice. Actually, even the thought, I should practice Dharma, even the interest, having some interest into Dharma would not occur into your mind. So when we use this expression freedom, the 8 freedoms, freedom here means freedom from oppressive situation. Freedom means you have obtained a very special physical basis that gives you the freedom to practice Dharma. Then in addition to the 8 freedoms, we have the 10 endowments. From the 10 endowments, 5 depend on yourself and 5 are provided from others. So to have the full set of this is extremely rare. So we say that if you are born in any of the situations where you do not have freedoms as a non-human, it is very difficult to practice. Even the thought of practicing will not occur in your mind. So what are those 4 oppressive states? 3 of them are to be reborn in the 3 lower migrations, right? So as an animal, as a hungry ghost, as a hell being. Obviously, if you're born in any one of these types of rebirths, the suffering is so oppressive that you don't have the opportunity to think about Dharma. Then we have, in addition to that, we have rebirth as a long life God. So being reborn in any of those 4 situations, or these types of body, these types of existence, is a great disadvantage. Then, in addition to that, we say that even if you are born as a human, you have to be free from 4 oppressive conditions. The first one is to be born in a barbaric region. Barbaric here means to be born in a place where there are no Buddhist teachings. The other one is to be reborn with defects of your senses or defects with your mental capacity. So any of these situations means that even as a human, you do not have the freedom to practice. So this paragraph actually presents different types of wrong motivations and the things that we're usually preoccupied with. So it says, there's no value to listen or practice Dharma with a motivation mixed with concerns such as to outdo the enemies and protect friends, which is praised by worldly people, but actually shallow, or the motivation to obtain material benefit. Okay, so you see, many times we go about our activities with the main motivation to overcome our enemies, or to protect our friends, or to gain some material wealth and so forth. So as it says here, this is not the right motivation. This is not how you can practice Dharma. But instead of this, it says you should meditate on impermanence, death, and so forth, and pass beyond these material thought patterns. Otherwise, you run the great risk of having negative motivations dominate your mind. So definitely we can see how we have obtained a life that is characterized by the 8 freedoms, 4 that comes in the human existence and 4 that come from avoiding non-human types of existence. And then in addition to this, we have the full list of the 10 endowments, 5 of which come from our side and 5 that come from others. So we are very fortunate that we have this human rebirth. We have our senses working properly. We have faith. We don't have wrong views. We are surrounded by the 4 types of individuals that refer here to the 4 levels of ordination, because when these are present, actually, we are very blessed. We are in an environment where we can receive many teachings. We are free from having committed any heinous crimes, such as, for example, killing one's father, killing one's mother, drawing blood from an arhat with bad intention, and so forth. If you have committed any of the 5 heinous crimes, it will be impossible to obtain the state of an arhat in this life or future lives, and it will be very difficult to generate realizations such as bodhicitta and so forth, and progress along the paths. And then, in addition, we have there are those that are provided by others. So we are surrounded by people who are actually practicing the 3 trainings according to the Vinaya Pitaka, the Sutra Pitaka, and the Abhidharma Pitaka. So these individuals exist and they can act as an example and guidance for us. And also, in general, in society, people are supportive of us. So we have a lot of conditions going for us. So not only do we have 5 endowments that come from our own side, but we also have endowments that come from other side. Endowments that come from other side means they are other people, other beings provide conditions that are favorable, make it easy for us to practice and generate realizations. So first of all, the first of those endowments that comes from others is that the Buddha has come. The second one is that the Buddha has taught, has given teachings. The third one is that the teachings of the Buddha abide, they remain. It is very important for our practice that the teachings abide, the teachings remain, because this means we have an opportunity to find a spiritual guide. And then if we find a guru, we can rely on the guru, and depending on the advice of the guru, we can make this life meaningful. But if the teachings did not remain, we would not be able to find a teacher. Then it will be very difficult to practice and make this life and future lives meaningful. The fourth one is that others have engaged that practice. And the fifth one is that others support us with great, with loving kindness and compassion and so forth. So it says here, if you do not meditate upon impermanence, death, and so forth, you thus pass beyond mundane thought patterns. You run the great risk of having negative motivations dominate your mind. So it stresses how important it is to meditate on impermanence. And if you miss meditating on impermanence, actually you miss out on a lot. You do not derive benefit. We have found a precious human rebirth, but it's very important not to waste it. It is very easy to waste the human rebirth if you allow yourself to be governed by these various types of worldly motivations that we have already mentioned. So it is very important for the individual to think for themselves that and I must pass beyond those mundane thought patterns. Otherwise, as it says here, you run the great risk of having negative motivation dominate your mind. It's very easy to actually be carried away carried away by worldly activities. So, for example, you think that engaging in trade or making money is something which is very important. However, all these mundane activities in the long run are very small. They're very unimportant. And you run the great risk here of working day after day after day, being totally dedicated to those worldly activities. But what the benefit that you derive from worldly activities is just a very short-term benefit, such as, for example, you manage to make enough money to feed yourself, to clothe yourself, to have a house, and so forth. However, ultimately, in the long run, those things do not benefit you. And the other thing is that in our lives, because there is so much impermanence, whatever, let's say, good conditions you might establish earlier on in your life, many times we see that, fame, reputation, wealth, and so forth later on decline. So as you can see, that's the great danger. You waste all your energy in those mundane activities. You might obtain some result, but it doesn't stay, it declines. So it continues by saying, on the other hand, if you practice the pure Dharma well and with no pretenses, you quickly and firmly lay the foundation of lasting happiness. You make this life meaningful and future lives meaningful. Discard as the husk of grain essenceless worldly pursuits, work of no positive consequences and spiritually of great peril. So this analogy here of the husk of the grain, something that, for example, in Tibet, it was something that it would be discussed a lot. They engage in agriculture. So when you get the crop, when you get the grain is covered in this very thin layer of useless material, the husk. And we always separate the husk from the heart of the grain. So the husk is something that we discard. So it says discard as the husk of the grain, essenceless worldly activities. So it says, take up the essence of Dharma so that at the time this essenceless human body is left behind, you will not depart from this life with regret. We want to reach the time of our death without any regret. We want to arrive there thinking, I have used this life in the best possible way. Furthermore, think to practice Dharma immediately. So the advice here is that we should not procrastinate, but we should engage the practice straight away. Many times the thought arises that, oh yeah, practice is good, but not straight away. I will do it tomorrow, I will start next month, I will start next year, I will do it later. This is actually a very bad motivation. It makes you procrastinate. We need to apply ourselves to practice and meditation immediately. The reason for that is we have obtained the precious human rebirth, but it doesn't last forever. Actually, it's very fragile and it deteriorates moment by moment. Therefore, it's important that we engage practice straight away. Then it says, drink the waters of meditation now and relieve the thirst of wishing to hold life's essence. So the example, the analogy that is made here is the person who is very thirsty. And what will that person enjoy most? What does the person need most? They need to drink some water. So meditation here, the practice is similar to the water that will completely relieve you from your thirst. It will satisfy you, it will quench your thirst. So if we continue with the essence of refined gold, at this point, the author gives us the verse from the lines of experience. This is verses 13 and 14. I will read it from the essence of refined gold because you have it up on the screen. So Rinpoche said, human life found but this one time more precious than a wish-fulfilling gem, so hard to regain and so easily lost, is as brief as a flash of lightning. Seeing this, discard worldly activity like the husk of a grain and strive day and night to take life's essence. So it talks about this precious human rebirth that it's only found this one time. You don't find it again and again. It is more precious than a wish-fulfilling gem. So we mentioned that wish-fulfilling gem. It can provide for many things. However, a wish-fulfilling gem cannot give you the opportunity, the realizations of bodhicitta, of compassion, and therefore it cannot help you progress along the path. This time of precious human rebirth gives us the opportunity to develop these realizations, and therefore it is more precious than a wish-fulfilling gem. So it is so hard to regain. Now, there are some people who might think, okay, in this life, I practice Dharma, I practice generosity, I am kind to others, I always help, I maintain ethics, and so forth. So, of course, I will get another rebirth in my next life. However, there are no such guarantees because our next rebirth is greatly determined by what happens at the time of death. If we come at the time of death with some serious illness, and if, let's say, you are experiencing great pain at the end of your life, when you're under great pain or you are wasted through illness, you will not think of practicing Dharma at the very last moments of your life. And you will not remember Dharma, you will not practice Dharma. So if you don't do this, as the text tells us, it's very difficult to obtain another precious human rebirth in your next life. The next thing says, it's so hard to gain and so easily lost. It is as brief as a flash of lightning. This type of rebirth is not something which is stable, permanent, and so forth. It decays, it deteriorates, it passes very quickly, just like a flash of lightning, just for a second, and then it is gone. So you can see that it is very difficult to find. We'll see it is difficult to find due to causes, difficult to find established through examples, and difficult to find from the point of view of its nature. Okay, so it is easily lost, and therefore, seeing this, discard worldly activity like the husk of a grain. So we talked about the husk of a grain, and strive day and night to take life's essence. So again, this expression to take or to extract the life's essence, it refers to practicing Dharma, which means to avoid negativity and to engage in actions that are in accordance with the Dharma. If we engage activities that are in accordance with the Dharma, on the basis of this, we can obtain the higher rebirth, create causes to obtain the higher rebirth of gods or humans. We can obtain the liberation of the individual of the small scope, and we can also, if we're influenced by bodhicitta and so forth, we can obtain liberation of omniscience. Okay, so then it continues with the 3 levels of spiritual application. How should you take the essence of the opportunities provided by this human vessel? It is extremely important to have an understanding of the ways of generating actual experience of the general foundations of the path and practices, and therefore I will briefly explain the process. This explanation has 2 headings. So first of all, it will give a general presentation, and in this general presentation, he will give 2 headings. The first one is how the path of the 3 levels of spiritual application condense all teachings of the Buddha. So the Buddha himself first developed bodhicitta, the aspiration to attain perfect compassion, wisdom, and power as the best means of benefiting all sentient beings. In the end, to benefit all beings, he attained full enlightenment. Then, solely to benefit beings, he taught the holy Dharma. And so it is very important to see here, you can read between the lines, because you can see that it indicates some important principles. First of all, it indicates that we have the practices of the three scopes. And within these the practices of the three scopes, they include all the stages of the training along the path that can actually lead you to the state of Buddhahood. And all of those practices are engaged for the sake of reaching Buddhahood in order to benefit all sentient beings. In terms of the activities of our teacher, Buddha Shakyamuni, initially, for 3 countless great eons, he engaged in amassing the accumulation. Then he reached the point of manifesting the state of enlightenment. And after manifesting enlightenment, he taught the Dharma extensively for the benefit of sentient beings. So it's very important here to appreciate how meaningful is this type of rebirth that we have, characterized by the 8 freedoms and the 10 endowments. It's very meaningful and it's very valuable. Why? Because on the basis of this life, we can practice and obtain all the types of goals of the individual of the small scope. We can also obtain all the goals of the individual of the middle scope, which is to obtain liberation. And finally, if we are influenced by great compassion and bodhicitta, we can even reach the state of enlightenment, of omniscience. And in addition to this, on the basis of this body, we can engage secret tantra and even achieve the final achievement of tantra, which is the state of Buddha Vajradhara. So by obtaining this type of precious human rebirth, we have the capacity to achieve all those things. And therefore, we say we need to recognize the capacity and therefore the great value of this rebirth. Okay, so it says here the practices he taught fall into 2 divisions. First of all, those aimed at the temporary benefit of a high rebirth as humans or gods, and those aimed at bringing the 2 ultimate benefits of liberation from samsara and the attainment of omniscience. So first of all, we have temporary benefits of high existence. High existence means you engage in the practices that are common with the individual of the small scope. You practice the morality of abandoning the 10 non-virtuous actions. And as a result of this, you create the causes to be reborn in a good state as a human or a god. So this is a temporary benefit. And then we have the ultimate benefit, which is that of obtain liberation from samsara and the attainment of omniscience. And it says the first group of practices, known as the practices of the person of initial capacity. So here the translator is using the term initial capacity for what we usually say the small scope, individual of the small scope. Okay, because they are used as a basis for all higher practices, they are called practices common with the person of the initial capacity. And you know how we have this presentation in the Lam Rim. So we have to start somewhere, and the beginning, the initial practices are the practices that are shared with the individual of the small scope. Okay, so it is important to make a differentiation here that when we talk about, let's say, a small motivation or the way of thinking of the individual of the small capacity, okay, if you are only preoccupied with this life and engage in various practices, this doesn't even qualify for the practice that is common with the individual of the small scope. So, and properly talking, the individual of the small scope is preoccupied with obtaining a good rebirth in the next life. So they're not preoccupied with this life. They are thinking about the next life. Okay. So it says the nature of the practitioner of initial capacity is outlined in Atisha's lamp of the path to enlightenment. Someone who, by the various methods, aims at higher samsaric happiness with his own interest in mind is known as the spiritual aspirant of initial capacity. Okay, so it says that is the practitioner of initial capacity is one who does not work for the pleasures of this life, but instead sets his or her mind upon the practices leading to rebirth as either human or God. Okay, so this to be reborn as a human or God is referred to with the term definite goodness. Okay, the practices that yield ultimate benefit, so this was the temporary benefit. The practices that yield ultimate benefits are of two types. Number one, those that bring nirvana or liberation, that is merely a freedom from samsaric suffering. So these are actually the practices that are common with the individual of the middle scope. And number two, those that bring liberation with omniscience. So here, these are practices of the individual of the great scope. The former is known as the practices of the person of intermediate capacity, or practices common with the person of intermediate capacity. So up to this point, the individual has not generated bodhicitta yet. So they're just, but they have turned their back to cyclic existence and they really want to obtain liberation. So Atisha's lamp for the path says, he who with the aim of peace for himself turns his back on samsaric happiness and reverses all negative karma is known as the spiritual aspirant of intermediate capacity. Okay, so after the quotation from Atisha's lamp, it says, that is, the intermediate practitioner turns his back on the securities and joys of higher samsaric rebirths and takes up the practices of the three higher trainings, ethical contact, concentration and wisdom in order to attain that liberation, which is free from all afflicted minds and karma that causes samsara. So it explains, it comments on the verse by Atisha's lamp. Then it says, finally, in addition to the Theravada vehicle practices outlined above, the methods that accomplish Buddhahood include all the practices of the perfection vehicle and the Vajra vehicle. So with this paragraph, it begins with the practices of the individual of the great scope. These methods are known as practices exclusive of the person of greater capacity. Atisha's lamp for the path says, he who sees suffering in his own life and realizing that others suffer likewise wishes to put an end to all misery is known as the spiritual aspirant of supreme capacity. In other words, the supreme practitioner is one who, empowered by great compassion, takes up methods such as the 6 perfections and the 2 stages of Tantra in order to attain full Buddhahood, in order to extinguish the suffering of others. This is how the path of the 3 capacities of spiritual application condenses all the teachings of the Buddha. So within the presentation of the practices of the individual of the great scope, you could have someone who practices the 6 perfections, or you can have someone who practices secret tantra. In both cases, the basis, the foundation of the practice is bodhicitta. And then from that, one engages in various practices to progress along the 5 paths, the 10 grounds, and as it says here in the case of Tantra, to engage the 2 stages, the generation and the completion stage. So we have to consider, first of all, in terms of the precious human rebirth, how it is difficult to find, and then how it is greatly meaningful. In terms of reflecting how it is difficult to find, we have to consider how it is difficult to find due to the causes, from the point of view of examples, and finally, from the point of view of its nature. So the precious human rebirth is difficult to find because it necessitates 3 causes. The first cause is to engage in the aiding or supporting practices of the 6 perfections. The second cause is to engage in pure ethics, and the third cause is to complement all this with stainless prayers. So first of all, there is mention here of the 6 perfections. Having obtained a human body, it is not, although it is very advantageous, it's a great advantage, it is not so easy to practice the 6 perfections. And even if you are successful with the practice of generosity, the next practice, which is the practice of patience, is quite difficult. We see in everyday life, in most of our interactions, how easy it is for us to become annoyed, to become angry with others, to lose our patience. So it is not easy to practice the 6 perfections. So we said that practicing the six perfections is difficult, but it doesn't mean that we should avoid the practice. We should do the practice. We will not elaborate too much because it takes a lot of time. The second course that we need is ethics. Now, there are different levels of ethics or morality. So first of all, we can mention the ethics of abandoning the 10 non-virtuous actions, the ethics that comes with the 5 vows for lay practitioners, the ethics of fully ordained monks, the ethics that come with the bodhisattva training, the ethics or the vows that comes with the practice of tantra, and so forth. In our case, the most important are the first two, so the ethics of abandoning the 10 non-virtuous actions and the 5 lay vows. These are very important to maintain. And finally, the third course is to supplement the previous two with stainless prayers. So prayer here is very important because through dedication prayers, we can make sure that we protect, we safeguard whatever root of virtue we have created. If we do not dedicate it properly, there is always the danger of destroying it through anger and so forth. So having come to understand the causes that establish the precious human rebirth, you can understand that from the point of view of causes, it is difficult to establish. So the second thing to consider here is how the precious human rebirth is rare by means of an example. The example was given by Buddha Shakyamuni in one of the sutras, the sutra of the arrangement of various flowers. So in there, the Buddha gave the analogy of a blind turtle that lives at the bottom of the vast ocean, and it rises up in the surface of the ocean looking for food and so forth once every 100 years. Then in the surface of the ocean, there is a golden yolk that is carried away, of course, by the waves and the winds and so forth. So the Buddha said that the chances of getting a perfect human rebirth are similar to the chances of this blind turtle that rises once every 100 years to come into the surface of the ocean and her head, or the turtle's head, to pass through the opening of the yolk. So what are the chances of this happening? Very slim. In here, we have a number of analogies. First of all, we have the ocean that symbolizes samsara, where we are born over and over again due to our karma and afflictions. The second one, we have the blind turtle. The blind turtle symbolizes ourselves, sentient beings who take rebirth again and again. The blindness symbolizes ignorance. It is from our ignorance that we develop self-cherishing, self-grasping, and so forth. Okay, then we have the yolk, the gold yolk that is carried away on the surface, and this is the teachings of the Buddha. So it is very important that if we encounter the teachings of the Buddha, that we actually engage those teachings. That's the most important thing. Okay, otherwise, if we don't do this, it's like coming empty-handed back from an island, a long trip to an island that is full of precious jewels. So we shouldn't do like that. So it is very important to make sure that we have this rebirth, this type of rebirth, and we make it meaningful. We have obtained this rebirth on the basis of our previous lives. In our previous lives, we have practiced very hard. We accumulated the necessary karma, and then we made those stainless prayers. So to accumulate the necessary karma, it means that we practiced the 6 perfections, and also we maintained ethics. So combining all these causes together, we were able to obtain this precious human rebirth now. It is now very meaningful because it can provide a good rebirth in the future, and it can even lead us all the way to the state of enlightenment. So it is important to make sure we make good use of this life, we recognize how valuable it is, and make it meaningful. A meaningful life is something that we make it. It's something that is internal. Meaningful life does not come from external conditions. Of course, it is true. Sometimes you might have some difficulty, and the external conditions can't provide you with whatever necessities you need. But this is something which is very short-lived and very temporary. External conditions, external wealth, and so forth cannot provide constantly for all your needs and cannot make you a happy person. If you look around you in this world, there are people who are beggars and there are people who are very rich. But even if you look at the lives of these rich people, of course, materially, they do not lack anything, but it doesn't mean that these people are happy, right? So to make this life meaningful refers to practicing the Dharma. It's only Dharma that can make the life meaningful. So it's not very easy to cover all the points in great detail, but let's summarize where we are. First of all, it is important to rely on the guru, and having found the guru and relied upon him or her, it is important that we practice according to the advice that they give. To practice according to the advice of the guru, it means to practice in a way that we do not waste our precious human rebirth. This type of rebirth that we have obtained is characterized by the 8 freedoms and the 10 endowments. And the collection of all these features makes it a very special type of body. This type of rebirth is greatly meaningful and very difficult to find. Greatly meaningful means that it has the ability to achieve the best. We have established the benefit of others at a great scale. We can generate bodhicitta, we can reach the state of Buddhahood. So all the potential, all the capacity comes here. This is what it means is greatly meaningful. At the same time, it is very difficult to find. We know it's difficult to find from the point of view of causes, from the point of view of examples, from the point of view of its nature. Some people think it's not so difficult to find this precious human rebirth. All you need is the sperm of the father and the ovum of the mother, and there you are, you have the rebirth. But it is not like this. It necessitates karma accumulated through past lives and a lot of prayers. So just as we explained, you need to practice ethics, you need to practice the 6 perfections, and so forth. So keeping all this in mind, understanding how precious this human rebirth is, please make it meaningful by engaging into practice. So if we practice in this way, we will make this life meaningful. We will have happiness in this life. We will also have happiness in the future lives. And whoever comes in contact with us will be pleased and joyful. So all of this is possible. Okay, if there's any question, please ask.
If we feel that practicing the Dharma is, we feel happy, how can we give up, our daily material, like work, or do we need to give up our, how to say, daily other enjoyment?
Okay, so very important question, and thank you for asking this. Buddha Shakyamuni has said that on one hand we have Dharma, and on the other hand we have worldly activities, and that these two things are different. Okay, they are opposite. So it's very important. But we have to understand that if you are in this life, if you are in this society, you have a family and so forth, of course, you will engage in worldly activities. You have to go to work, you have to make money to buy food, to buy clothes, and so on and so forth. But what is important here is that we engage in those worldly activities. The difference, right? So without having a very strong
Hi, Bola. Sorry, it got interrupted. Could you repeat your sentence? Like what that? I think she was at daily activities.
Okay, so the important thing is that we can engage in ordinary worldly activities. The Buddha has not prohibited that, but the important thing is to do it without attachment, to do it with the right motivation. When the motivation is right, then there is no fault in engaging in these activities. As long as you keep down this idea of me first all the time, keep that at bay, then engage in worldly activities without attachment and with a good motivation. So with a good motivation, go out, go to work every day. That is beneficial. So, for example, let's say that you are in business, you are trading. Of course, you want to have many customers. You have to have big sales every day. But let's say that you're selling something and you have this motivation. Whoever buys this object, may they be happy. May they always have money. May they always have wealth. And may they use the wealth, or maybe they use this object that they buy from me to make offerings to the Buddha, to support the Dharma, and so forth. So why not? And okay. Oh, okay. So if you are selling, right, let's say you have many customers, but you sell with the motivation, may all these people be happy, may they always be wealthy, may they take these objects, and with these objects, may they make offerings to the Buddha, may they support the Dharma. So, that's the excellent motivation, and hopefully you have many customers and a great income, great profit.